Hey guys, right now we are sitting in the cockpit of my 1990 RX-7 convertible. This car sits a lot, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to get in and go for a ride and kind of talk to you about why I think this is such a cool car. I mean, over the years, I've always found myself kind of coming back to, the original love and affinity for this car that I had when I was a kid. And there are a lot of cars out there you can get for the kind of money you'll spend on a car like this that are way more, invigorating in terms of their outright and sheer performance, horsepower wise and handling as well. But the RX-7 has a special appeal, especially to me, for its uniqueness and the way that it delivers the performance that it can offer. It's not big on much of anything, but it's such a well-built car that once you're behind the wheel, you forget about everything else you could have, and you just enjoy everything that you do have in this car. So I'm gonna take a little ride in it today just because I want to, one, get it out of the garage. Two, every time I walk by the damn thing, I want to get in and go for a ride, which it's not always convenient, but right now I have the opportunity, so come take a ride with us. All-wheel drive. One of the things I really like about this car is the noise. Not that rattling you just heard, damn it. It's this exhaust note. I have modified my intake a little bit. The air box was originally closed up and it was heavily restricted. I mean, with the way that this engine performs and operates, based on how they built it, to meet California's strict emissions guidelines, they had to really suffocate it. So the air box was completely closed off. And I just kind of opened up the top of it so air could flow in. And then I had to modify a little bit the channeling system that allowed fresh air in. So it has a little bit louder note because of that, but the exhaust sounds amazing. Every now and then I'll be passing by cars at low rev, low speed in a parking lot, and you can hear the alarm start to go off. And you're thinking, or I'm thinking, dude, this is only 1.3 liters worth of rotor engine. But it's got such a low burble at low speeds that it just sets those alarms off, and that's kind of cool. It's just a fun, flipping car to drive. And most people who like RX-7s, old and young, I'm really impressed at how many young people like them. They totally get it. But if you're a car person, guy or gal, you drive this car, you're gonna be like, yeah, it's not bad. It's a fun car. That's what this car is all about, fun. Now, this car had about 160 horsepower when new. And in 1990, that was not bad. That was actually really good, especially for what it is, engine size-wise. Overall car dimension size-wise. It's got really good mid-range. It revs really high, and then you still got a little bit of something to give at the top of the RPM band. This thing revs out to 8,000 RPM, and folks, that's not just window dressing, that's real. I've had it up there. When you hit 6,000, the secondaries and the throttle body kick open, and the car goes even faster. It's a go-kart. It's the original Mazda go-kart. Woo! And that's kind of what I'm getting at, the appeal. You didn't hear me getting on the car. There wasn't any heavy throttling or acceleration going on. I just kind of merged into this highway. And I was going faster than I was supposed to be going. The car kind of lulls you into thinking that it's just kind of moseying along, when in reality, it's moving. Now, unless my speedometer is inaccurate because it's so old, I'd be the one the trooper's trying to get to pull over right now. It's only got a 5-speed transmission. The gears are pretty tall, but because of the way that the engine that it's made it to produces power, it makes the most of it, and it never feels like it's suffering. I mean, I'm in 5th gear, and I can accelerate pretty quick. Going uphill right now. The car just keeps picking up. That's a good sign of compression too. Because one of the things these cars suffer a lot from is losing compression. And it's not so simple as just doing a lower end build or upper end build like on a American engine. You got to go through the painstaking process of changing out apex seals and all that business. And that's why these cars are such a unique ownership experience. Like if you buy one, ideally if it's got a lot of miles and you don't have service history on it and it's got some leaks, which most of them do, figure in what it's going to cost you to rebuild the engine, and also figure in maybe doing some modifications to get a little bit more out of the performance end of it. A typical rebuild of one of these engines, and you've got to furnish that engine block, is going to run you somewhere around $4 to $5 grand. And you're like, probably like, that's just ridiculous. But you know what? If you get the car right, if you get one that's not running and you can, negotiate to get the thing for like, let's just call it $500, that's a good damn deal, because the car will be worth what you've put in it if you decide to sell it with a rebuild engine and get it done from a reputable mechanic. A lot of Mazda specialists on Miatas and also on RX-7. So those guys are the places to go to. Get on the blog sites and find out who's doing what. Get some resources and info. Luckily for me, this car, even though it does leak, the engine is in great condition. Oh, I love it. I love it when it does that. I think part of the appeal is just that it revs up so far, and the noise it makes when it does so. Like I was saying about the compression, when you've got good compression in these cars, they accelerate well. If you want to test a car out, if you're on a test drive of a car you're considering buying from someone, drive it on a hill and put it in one of the top gears. Depending on what your speed is, it should be able to pull it. In fifth gear, if you're above 60 miles per hour, you should be able to take the hill. It'll go slow, but if your RPMs aren't dropping and your speed's not dropping drastically, chances are the compression's really good. A lot of the leaks are pretty, minimum leaks in that they're not major components going out. Oil pan gaskets, things like that. If the casing itself is leaking, doesn't necessarily mean you've lost everything. It's just some seal is going bad. That's not something you want to deal with, but it's not the end of the world. And again, if you can get the car at a really good bargain, put the money in it and rebuild it. And if you're a fan of this car, it's worth doing, because what you're going to get back in terms of its driving experience, you're not going to be disappointed, I promise you. I'm not disappointed. And I have to put a freaking diaper under this thing every night so it doesn't soil the shit out of my garage. One day I will rebuild the engine, but because the engine's running so strong and the leak's minimal, I think it seriously is an oil pan gasket, and I might just tackle that at some point. But if I decide to go ahead and do a clutch, it's very likely I'm going to go ahead and do a rebuild on the car, just to get that engine, just back up to where I want it to be. Just pulls so nice. It's got that old car performance feel. Like, there's not a lot to it, and you don't think much of it until you drive it. And you go, you know what? It doesn't have a lot of power. But what it does have, it really sort of brings to life the essence of this car. It makes you feel what the manufacturer intended out of it. It wasn't meant to outrun a Corvette. Maybe a 944. But what it does well. And it's a lot of fun. I had one of these back in college. I had a GTU. And the GTU was like, it was supposed to be more the track-centric car because it was lighter weight. It didn't have power windows. It did have an electric sunroof, which I thought, why would you put an electric sunroof in a car you're trying to make lightweight? But it was still fun. And I remember I would go around corners in that car in third gear at low speed, and the rear end would come out. It was just so easy to get the wheels to come loose. In the wet, mind you. But still fun. We're up in Newport right now. San Joaquin Hills. Just nice wide lanes. I actually felt the secondaries at about 5,500 RPMs. They kind of opened up a little more. You hear that noise, man. It's intoxicating. It makes you want to drive the thing. Second. If you notice the target top, it's one of the things I loved about the convertible RX-7. They designed this top so that you could take the center panel out, and the structural rigidity of the back of the roof is so good that it holds up against wind and all that stuff with that section out. So essentially it's like driving a Targa. So you get a convertible and a Targa in one, and it looks equally cool no matter which one you're strutting. I like having the Targa. Part of it's because I always wanted a Supra. Supras always had those Targa, and then the Porsche 911 had a Targa. I just think it's cool that they incorporated it into a convertible. You get 2 for 1 out of that. But it is completely electric. Because of the Targa section though, you have to take it out, or at least collapse it manually if you want to take the roof down. So if you want to cruise with a sunroof, or not a sunroof, with the convertible top open, you have to manually take that centerpiece down with a switch. You just push this button and it folds. It's a little cumbersome, but you can do it from inside the car. You don't have to get out the car to do it. However, you don't have the top cover like on a lot of convertibles, particularly nowadays, that covers that thing up so you don't see it. So it just sticks up. It looks a little odd if you leave the Targa in. I like to take the Targa out if I'm going to drop the top, because that way the top goes down flush and it looks smoother. And it fits in the trunk. I mean, for a convertible, this thing has a really good trunk. I've gotten a ton of groceries back there. It's not like a Miata. So I can get that top in the back of the trunk, or the back of the car in the trunk, and it fits nicely, and I still got a little room. If I need to put something back there, I can. So it's a really smart design. I think these guys did a really good job putting this thing together. And it's lasting. I've got little bits and pieces that fall out every now and then. I'll get in this car and find some brittle plastic that's come from who knows where in the floor, and I'm like, what the hell was that? Well, nothing's falling off, so I'm not gonna worry too much. All right, so anyway, I just really, really love this car. I'd actually entertained getting rid of it at one point because I was looking to pick up something else, and I ended up picking them up anyway. And every time I get in this car, I'm drawn right back into what I like about it. I'm drawn right back into the affinity I have for it. And it's like, well, I'm not getting rid of it. It happens a lot. I gotta say, I think about selling this car at least twice a year. And then I drive it. And then that goes out the window. All right, guys. So that was a drive in my 1990 RX-7 FC, for those of you who are fanatics, myself included. Again, this is just one of the best cars that I've ever driven. I mean, it's nostalgia has a lot to do with it, but for the most part, it's just very satisfying to drive. It's driving dynamics, from the handling, the way the engine delivers power, everything just works well together. It won't blow your mind. It's not going to outrun anything necessarily, but as a driver's car, I think it's really high up there with some of the best cars you can drive. The car that came after this, the FD, that's a car that really took off in terms of value and desirability. You know, it's a car that you're going to pay a pretty penny for right now. This car did not really take that direction. It's not one of the cars that you're going to pay top dollar for unless it has low miles. But you can get it relatively cheap. I think if the Nissan 240Z is any indicator of what a lot of the old cars from the 70s, 80s, and 90s are going to do, this is probably going to be a car that in the next 5 to 10 years you'll start to see move up, particularly the cars that are, you know, taken care of and well sorted out. This one needs a little bit of paint, but that's really about it. Maybe an oil pan gasket, but for the most part it's running really well. If you're thinking about getting one of these cars, as I mentioned before, take into account, you know, the rebuild cost. Chances are you're probably going to get a car that's not been that well cared for, or it's just, you know, been run so long without really having a rebuild done or really being preserved that you're going to need to do that. Some of the things to look out for if you're considering it, I would say check, most importantly, your oil. If the oil has any coolant in it, that means that the seal between the oil chamber and the coolant flow has gone. They're very thin. It typically does happen, and that's going to require you to rebuild the engine. You can also look under the gas cap, or the oil cap, sorry, and you can see if there's a buildup of a creamy, milky looking substance. That means that it's combusting the oil and the coolant together, and it's coming up to the top and creating that little foamy looking buildup. So that's something you want to keep in mind. If that's the case, if you're not prepared to, you know, shoot someone a very lowball offer, and, you know, if they know that that's what's wrong with it, they're going to have to accept that they're not going to get the money out of it that they think they are. The fact that a car is running doesn't mean that it's going to keep running, doesn't mean that it's running well. That's basically having a sore that you don't treat. It's going to get infected. So keep that in mind. Another thing to check is firing. Let's say you're looking at a car that kind of stutters and putters and sputs. I would say another condition would be checking the oil, making sure there's not water in it or some other fluid. Also checking the exhaust, if there's any smoke coming out, if there's water constantly coming out. Definitely things to be concerned about, and definitely things that are going to require a rebuild of that engine. If the car is not running, I've bought cars that weren't running, and my guess at the time was that it needed an ignition coil, which that could be the case sometimes. And essentially all that is a little module that fits on the distributor, and it causes it to fire. That's something you'd find on a lot of the early cars. But on these cars, you're going to have the dual coil pack. So if the car is not running and they can't explain to you why, if it's not a simple battery, if it's not simple spark plugs, I would check the coils. So basically pull the spark plugs out of the car, leave the wires on it, have someone turn the car over. Check both coils, check all spark plugs. If they're firing, there's something else going wrong. Probably the apex seals and the things that need to happen to make it combust are not happening. That's an engine rebuild. Lowball it if you think it's a great car otherwise, and get the car fixed, a rebuild on your engine. If you see that that's the problem, the coils aren't cheap. If you're not getting any fire, it doesn't necessarily mean that the coils are the only problem. So don't go into it thinking that you can get this sorted out for a couple $100 and you're going to get a steal on a car. Could have a bigger problem beyond that. The fact that you can't check it means that it's a bigger gamble. And so I would say if it does not fire, checking the coils, maybe consider pricing it as if you need to rebuild the engine. Maybe you do get a steal, and maybe that's all it needs. But that's just one other way you can look into potential disasters. Also check your rear end. If it's got a lot of sort of slack in it from engagement, if you hear a lot of clanking, car might have been drifted, car might have been, you know, using a lot of burnouts. These cars weren't really set up to do that. They're more precision handling cars than they are drift cars. You do see a lot of old cars being drifted. You have to change a lot of components to make it suitable for that. So if you get a car that looks like it's original and that's happening, you're probably going to need a drive shaft. You're probably going to need some output bearings. You're probably going to need a rear end, and that stuff's going to be expensive because these cars, they're becoming rarer, and that you're not going to be able to get parts as readily available. There are quite a few still on the market, and a lot of them are being used as parts cars. So if you can grab one up, grab a spare car, that's a really good deal. If you can get them both for pretty cheap, you can interchange parts, and you can probably come up with a really solid car as a result of that, that will still have originality from the standpoint OEM level. Other things to look for, just, you know, the suspension, check the bushings, check the strut tower, check for rust. Electronics, make sure all the buttons are working. If they're not, it's not usually a wiring situation. These cars were very well built from a standpoint of the wiring and the quality and the build of the interior, exterior, and all those components. But sometimes they get a little corrosive in the connectors and conductors. So sometimes you can take those switches out, clean them off with a Brillo, and put them back in, and everything works, you know, like it should. Sometimes it's motor stuff. Most of you are probably familiar with easy test of electronic components, particularly like windows, latches, and things like that that have a relay to them. You can take a paper clip or some kind of metal with a continual loop, stick it in the socket, and you'll get a response. And that way you'll know if the motor's responding or the relays are working and things like that. Beyond that, I think, you know, your motor's going to be your biggest concern, making sure that that's up to spec. And if that is, you can kind of work around the rest. But make sure you get a deal that you feel comfortable with down the road, because if the car does not appreciate, at least be happy that you got a car that you can enjoy driving. But I do think because the 240 market is taking a big spike up in value, I think a lot of the cars that were subsequent to that, particularly these two-door hatch coupes, are going to start to go up in value. Particularly the RX-7s, they got a cult following, and if you've got one that's in decent shape, it'll always be a market for it. If you don't do anything but break even, probably in the next few years, 5 to 10, you'll see these cars kind of increase in value. So that's my drive for today. I'm glad you guys could join me. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have comments, questions, feel free to reach out to us. Subscribe, like, share. Let us know what you think. If you've got any stories that you'd like to share with us with your car or a car similar to any of that we're reviewing, let us know. We'll be glad to feature a comment about that and just kind of create a conversation with our followers, because this is about driving, and it's about all-wheel drive.